we're going to be learning about the whys of Judaism as it relates to Jew in the world. This is sort of a miscellaneous category for all the types of questions and connections that relate to the rest of the world. But first of all, we're learning as we mark the yard site of, on the 10th of Av of Nachum Zev ben Shimon, Mr. William Foya. That's David's father, who came to New York 2 weeks after Kristallnacht at the age of 15 years old. At 18, he was a part of the D-Day,
82nd Airborne.
the 82nd Airborne Division to go back into Europe, and he won the silver and bronze stars for his service to the United States. He was also later on the vice president of the Young Israel of Oceanside, and served with distinction. The Shama should have an aliyah.
Amen.
What a special story. Let's learn a little Torah. So here we go. Just very interesting questions. I'm sure there's many more. But let's start for the first one is, imagine that you are on the non-Jewish side of things and you're looking around, and this happened to me. I just were in Disney World. I was getting mixed up. And if somebody comes over to me and says, I couldn't help noticing that you're Jewish. I said, you're right. And says, what are those strings? What are those string things, So it's amazing. From the non-Jewish world, there's so many questions about Jews. So we dealt with tzitzis a little while back. That was an entire shir by itself. But let's say they say, I can't figure out why is it that all these Jewish men are wearing little caps, right? Why are they wearing these little hats on their heads, right? So why is that the case? Interestingly enough, if you look at the times of the Gemara, it doesn't seem to be that was the normative practice necessarily. The Gemara does have many comments. So as an example, the Gemara in Kedusha Lamed Aleph tells us that Rav Huna in the name of Yeshua would say, Lo maski arba amos begila arosh. Rav Huna was very careful not to walk 4 amos without his head covered, and the reason was, he says, Shechina lamala miroshi. He felt that the divine presence was above him, so he felt that it was a sense of respect being covered. The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Vav and Beis tells us that people should kasi reisha kihechi tihavi alach eimso d'shmaya. Covering your head is a way to express fear of heaven. That's why it's said over there. Similarly, the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Yud Ches and Beis tells us Teisili that a person is deserving if they don't walk without a uncovered head. And in Masechah Sofrim in the 14th Perek, we know that there's a yesh orin that berosh megula ein rishayla hoitzi haskara mipiv. A person should not mention Hashem's name with their head uncovered. So the Gemara sort of mentions that in the context of the notion of understanding the Shekhinah is above you, in its sense of humility, and it talks about also the notion of brachos, but it doesn't mandate it, meaning to say, the Gemara doesn't say thou shalt wear some sort of form of covering. It doesn't talk about that. It does say that it seems to be, and the way it's described would be, in the language it uses is as a midas chasidus, it sounds like, meaning it's something that should be done, yes.
Does it distinguish between men and women?
This seems to be men-centric. We'll get to women in a second, but it seems to be specifically men-centric. As to the appropriate way to conduct oneself. But you're right, the logic should be across both. But we'll see in a second. Women have a separate responsibility of head covering. Okay, so how does it shake out in halacha? Already as we get to the Rishonim, which was about 800 years ago, we start seeing that for instance, the Rambam says that a person should not pray with a uncovered head. A person should not pray with an uncovered head. So this is where the Rambam Paskins in Halacha the Kol Boys similarly quotes the Rif as well that it is appropriate for a person not to walk without a covered head. That's a midas chasidus, and not to be in shul with an uncovered head. And in Halacha, it seems to be that it's paskined that the Shulchan Aruch is very careful. It says we paskin like the machmirim. You cannot say a bracha you shouldn't have azkara without Hashem's name, without your head covered. And then the way it's said at the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch is that asur leilek b'karma zakufa. A person may not walk with an upright, sort of this haughty posture. And then the Shulchan Aruch continues to say v'lo yelech arba amos begila rosh. And a person should not walk 4 amos 7 feet without their head being covered. Fascinating. That's the way that sort of it appears in halacha. There are those who disagree. So, for instance, one of the contemporaries of the Shulchan Aruch, the Maharshal, Rav Shlomo Luria, living in the 1500s, disagreed and said you can't. It's not. You can't mandate this. Because he points out that there's no source for this to be a global mandate, and he sort of tones it down. Mashra dafka becomes the kufu da aser aval begiloi rosh ein boy iser. He says, look, there are those who did this. It was a wonderful thing, but you can't say to everybody, like blanket mandate, blanket regulation, that everybody should wear a head covering. Doesn't seem to work like this.
I draw a conclusion from that on Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, a Chassid, that made it for his children and everyone.
It could be that. I mean, it seems to be that it's got more global than that, which is what leads us to. So it's a good question. It seems to be.
Sure of what?
Yes. Actually, there is a really interesting. If you want to go into this, there is an interesting Chakira article, which is called "The Great Cover-Up of History." That was and it's about how it seems pretty clear that not everybody used to be covering their heads in the men department throughout the course of history, but it was so to speak censored retroactively, so to speak. But independently of that, meaning like just fascinating, because if you look at the Ein Yaakov, the picture of the Ein Yaakov, he doesn't have a yarmulke on, right? And then, so people then drew in the yarmulke afterwards. It's a whole thing. It's really fascinating as to the historical development of this. Be it as it may, it seems to be that if you look at your average observant Jew today, the average observant Jew is covered, right? So in the men department. So that's the case. So then,
find Jews, many Jews in business places where they would not wear.
You're right. So interesting enough, there's a different part of halacha that applies to this, and this already he's talking about. But the Mari Bruna talks about this already in his Shavas, and he says, "Anon de dairinon beina umos inu azli begilu erosh v'choshu kechukas akom." He says, being as societally the non-Jews all walk around without their heads covered, and the Jews walk around with their heads covered, it takes on a new meaning, which is what's called chukos akom. What's chukos akom? The Torah tells us you should not go in the ways of the non-Jews, and because societally, so meaning to say, initially, as the Gemara describes it, there's notions of appropriately mentioning Hashem's name being covered, walking around while one's head's covered out of humility and recognition of the Shekhinah. That may have been the notion of one individual started doing this, but in the end of the day, because it became more societally acceptable, then the Mari Brunix is saying, and this the Taz brings this on the Shulchan Aruch as well, he says it's included in Chukas Akom, which means that for a Jew today not to wear it is acting like a non-Jew. And that's a problem. Now, interestingly enough, there are limitations in the framework of Chukas Akom itself. So, as an example, can a doctor wear a white coat? The answer is yes, because a white coat has it distinguishes the doctor from the rest of the providers today. Right? Today they want to eclipse the doctors from being distinguished. But yes, we do need to know who the doctors are. And it's very important to know who the doctors are, which is why the white coat is not chukas akum, because that is a functional reason that we need it, right? So the Rav Avadia Yosef already points out in the Yechaveh Das that if wearing the yarmulke has a functional reason, as an example, he talks about heat, right? So if a person is not covering their head because of heat, as an example, it doesn't fall in the category of the chukas akom, so to speak, in that respect. So there are carve-outs within this, but it is important, therefore, to notice that this is the way it is viewed today. Interestingly enough, how does the Mari? 1 second, I'm just. There are those who point out, as an example, the Yechaveh Das says that I just want to see where I found this. A really fascinating is I can't find where I put this, but it is interesting that today we view this as one of sort of the most distinguishing factors. Meaning, let's say that your daughter or granddaughter gets a shidduch read to them, and the guy walks around without a yarmulke, right? So you'd be like, I'm not so sure, right? Now, happens to be that's not the most important mitzvah in the Torah, right? Happens to be this is a societal cultural thing, right? which has turned into, right, has turned into a recognizable mark. But nonetheless, it's so recognizable that we associate it with observant Judaism. And a person who takes it off, we ask questions like, why are you taking it off? Why do you not want to be seen as a Jew? Like, for what reason, right? And so it has taken on its own life and its own distinction as well in this regard. It is interesting to note that because it has, therefore, there's even halachas as to how big the yarmulke should be, as an example, right? So, meaning to say, once we're there, let's start. Let's start figuring out. Let's start to this. In England, the yarmulke is called a couple. Do you know that? So that's the English call it. A couple, a person's supposed to, technically speaking, person when davening is supposed to have 2 layers of covering over their head, which is why, just in some, the notion of a hat during davening, not when you go to the pizza store, but when you're davening, is to have 2 layers of covering, right? Which is why some people are makbid, like with the velvet yarmulke, because they've got 2 layers of cover. It's a couple, right? It's a double layer of covering. Which is why some people criticize the kippah struga. There's many other reasons which are more called the more problematic criticisms, but that's one of the questions: is a double covering because of davening. Having a double covering is as well. So there's lots of like sort of ins and outs. Rav Moshe talks about the notion of it preferably being a roiv of the head. Now, for those who are losing their hair, it's very helpful, right? It's a very easy excuse to go in that direction. But nonetheless, the way that Rav Avadia points out in the Chavedas is he says, look, it should be something which you can see from every direction, And it's always amazing because there's, remember when Naftali Bennett was over here, he said, one of the questions that people always ask me is, how does the yarmulke stay on? Because he wears his yarmulke at the back of his head. You can't see it from the front. And if you see so many people, there's a secret, so it's double-sided tape, I'm sure. But the truth is that if you look at your average person's headshot on their business website, a lot of people, manage to perch the yarmulke further back, and they look just like the non-Jews because that's the kind of the society we're in. But that's not exactly how it should be. But like that nonetheless, this speaks to this notion. So from what we'll call an a priori perspective, it's a sign of humility and modesty. And therefore, by the way, if we look down at other Jews because they don't have it, then it's clearly not a sign of humility and modesty, right? But nonetheless, it turned into something which became a symbol of Judaism, and as such, therefore, not wearing it says something about oneself as well. It used to be that this was one of the biggest changes, one of the many changes that Reform Jewry brought, is that they, be a Jew at home and a mensch in the streets. Is that was what they did. They wanted to enter into society, which ultimately rejected them. But nonetheless, that was the direction. That experiment clearly failed, but we still continue to somehow to be seduced by the same trends. Okay, next question is: what about is let's say a person goes to Israel and says, I noticed that all these Jewish women seem to have their heads covered. The reason they don't say that in the diaspora is because they just don't notice, because there's these things called shaitels. And some of these shaitels look very, 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 very real. So, but let's say they go to Israel. And in Israel, there's less shaitels. Have you noticed that? There's very few shaitels in Israel, because certainly among the Sephardic population, women don't wear shaitels. They wear mitpachot. They wear scarves. So why is this? So it is interesting. The Torah does talk about this. The Torah talks about, in Parashas Naso, the terrible situation of this accusation of infidelity, and the whole sota. It's a terrible situation. And one of the things that happens is when this woman goes to the Beis Hamikdash, it describes uparais Rosh Haisha, is that her hair is uncovered, as a so to speak a symbol, as she has to drink this water and bring this korban. It's a symbol of embarrassment that her hair is uncovered, and the implication the Gemara draws from this in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael is Azar leBnai Yisrael shelo yetzu beparua rosh, is that Jewish women do not go out with hair uncovered. Why this is the Gemara in Brachos and the in Shira, based on the pasuk in Shira Shirim, understands that this is actually one of the private, modest aspects of a woman. And therefore, it's Sa'ar Be'isha Erva, is the way the Gemara describes it, is that hair, Sa'ar, is considered a erva, is considered a element of modesty which should not be displayed to the public. And there's a discussion between the Rishonim: is this a Daraisa Yisur, or is this a we'll call Das Yehudis, Das Moshe? Is this a tradition, which is the way it became? Interestingly enough, in Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch paskins in pretty clearly that Israel Peruas Rosh Bashuk Achas Punuya Achas Eshezish. The Shulchan Aruch says a startling thing. It says that Jewish women should not go out with hair uncovered, whether they are married or not married. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Pretty wild, right? But the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim disagrees with that and says only married women have that responsibility. So why is it? Yes.
Talk about maybe Sulos covering their hair.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. The Shulchan Aruch is pasking basically on this Rambam that everybody, all Jewish women should cover their hair, and that's the Shulchan Aruch paskins. But in the other place, he paskins only married women. So how do you resolve this contradiction within the Shulchan Aruch? So the Bach, Rav Yoel Circus resolves it by saying that the Penuya that's referred to in the Shulchan Aruch refers to a divorced or widowed woman, not a unmarried woman. Just interestingly enough, that's why he resolves it. And the Magen Avraham views it as saying that it does not refer to, when it comes to a unmarried girl, it's not referring to covering or not covering, it's referring to whether her hair should be braided or not braided. Interesting. Meaning peruos, meaning to say is it, which is why you'll see in some schools they're very careful that the girls keep even the unmarried girls, they're not just wearing their hair out, they have them braided or in ponytails, as an example. Just that comes from this Magen Avraham as well.
Modesty issue.
That's a modesty, right? That's
mitigates the attractiveness.
Right. So that's where this comes from in this respect. Interestingly enough, there is a lot of discussion on this particular topic in halacha, because the question is like, in society, how prevalent is this or how not prevalent is this? And there's a very long article written by Rabbi Broid, who just was in our shul a few weeks ago, and there's another response by Rabbi Shulman on this particular topic. Is what about societally? Meaning to say, is that what happens if you're living in a society where most women do not cover their hair? Does that change it? Is it subjective to the reality that one would be in or not? Rav Soloveitchik's wife did not cover her hair. Right? There are many people in Europe who do not cover their hair. The Aruch HaShulchan bemoans that fact of this. The Rav Soloveitchik used to say, I told her, but she did not obey. So meaning to say, how does this play out? Is this dependent on the subjectivity? Is a matter of a large discussion in halacha. It is worthwhile noting that in Ashkenazic tradition, a lot of this is mitigated by the notion of what's called a peah nachres. What's a peah nachres? That's a sheitel, a wig. And already the Mishnah in Shabbos talks about a woman walking around with a peah nachres, which is some form of wig, which indicates, and that's why today, in a society where we have a lot of creative technology, we can make incredible wigs, which are very lifelike. And the Ramah paskins that it is fine. In the Sephardic society, as an example, the Rav Ovadia Yosef in the Yabia points out, based on earlier poskim in the Be'er Sheva and the She'elas Yavetz, that no, the wig that's referred to over there is something which was covered as well. I mean, there was a hat on top of it. There was something else. It wasn't that she was just walking out of the wig by itself, which is why, as an example, in Satmar, right, you will never find a woman just with a sheitel. You'll find a woman with a sheitel and a hat. Right, you'll just the bangs. That's where that notion comes from. And in Sephardic society, women don't wear sheitels; they wear mitpachot. And in Israel, it's a whole thing. Most of the society is women with fancy scarves rather than sheitels. In America, it's sheitels. It is interesting. It's just astonishing the cost of that today in the society. It is an immense cost, and doesn't last so long necessarily. But it is sort of something which gives dignity at the same time as tzniut, as modesty. And so this is one of the balances that we have
But
in
what's the
society.
reason- What is the reason that they don't accept the wicked? Because it's too...
I guess it's the same, meaning to say it looks the same as lifelike in a certain sense in that respect. It's just a question of how to read that Mishnah, and is the Mishnah standalone or not, as it is. It's interesting that a per nachris, a shaitel, is viewed as an item of clothing. So people say, can I wash my shaitel during the 9 days? The answer is no, because it's a piece of clothing. Can you trim your shaitel during the sphira? The answer is yes. It's like making alterations on it. Meaning just say it's not treated like hair, it's treated like a garment, just interestingly enough in terms of the sort of the framework of this. And again, just to point this out when it comes to both the men's head covering and the women's head covering, we're all on a progression of the way we are in our personal spiritual life and moving in a direction of what is something which we can accept and what is appropriate in our family, and we're trying to get closer. So this just in terms of painting out where this comes from and understanding some of the issues behind it. Which now comes to the next topic, which is, why is it that I go to business meetings and Jewish men or Jewish women don't shake hands with me, right? I feel so bad, and I put up my hand, and they say they don't, and I think, is it about me? Why do they not shake hands with me? So the truth is that the Torah says a very important pasuk, and it says this is a really important pasuk, which is Lo sikrevu legalois erva. Do not come close to immorality, to revealing nakedness, which means to say is not only is there prohibition of intimacy between people who are not married to each other, there is a responsibility of not coming close to that as well. What does that mean? So the Rambam says that it refers to any arayos derech evarim or shechibek or nashak derech ta'ava bekiruv basar. A person is not allowed to engage in physical touching of a person who they're not allowed to be married to. You're not allowed to touch them in a way of derech ta'ava, in a way which is displaying intimacy or endearment. The Ramban rejects this and says this is not what the Torah is actually meaning. It is an asmachta, meaning to say this is a rabbinic enactment. And the prohibition is a drabanon as a fence around the arayot, meaning to say that it's a rabbinic prohibition. This makes a big difference because rabbinic or biblical may have different applications or different opportunities of kula depending on circumstances. The Shulchan Aruch codifies the Rambam's opinion that it's an isur d'oraisa. One's not allowed to engage in touching of a member of the opposite gender one's not married to. And the question just becomes is, what is derech ta'ava? What is in ways of endearment? Right? So as an example, then it becomes, let's say you have a Jewish doctor. A Jewish doctor has to touch their patients, right? Right, they have to examine their patients, and half of their patients are members of the opposite gender. Today we don't know really necessarily, we can't ask, but just in terms of biologically they are, right? So in those situations, one is allowed to because this is not derech chiba. This is the way that it's not in a way of endearment itself. Similarly, a question was asked to Rav Moshe Feinstein, which he answers in Ibn Ezer, which is what happens if you're going on the subway? And if you're going during rush hour, it is inevitable that you're going to be squished up against somebody. Or let's say you just take a seat, somebody's going to sit next to you, right? And so Rav Moshe says that this again is lo derech ta'ava v'chiba, right? This is not a way of endearment or intimacy. And he says, but a person who will be, so to speak, triggered by that experience should try to think of alternative ways of getting to work, right? I mean, to say if that's the kind of thing which does arouse a person in an inappropriate way, they should figure out other options as well. What about handshakes? So, the Moedim Uzmanim, just to point this out, Rav Sternbach is very clear, and he says that this is considered an Avizrael de Gila Arayos. This is an extension of the Isra Doraisa, is the Rambam Paskins of Gila Arayos, of inappropriate immoral contact, and it's Yarog Val Yavor. That's pretty strong, right? That means to say is that a person should rather have their life taken than to shake hands with a member of the opposite gender. That's how That's how strong he views it. It is worthwhile noting that not all the poskim agree with this. And there seems to be some sort of equivocation in Igros Moshe and Rav Moshe Feinstein about this. When the one place he says it's completely poshet she'asar af lepenuya, he says it's very clear it should be asar. In another place he says, ulai savrim da'ain ze derech chiba v'tava. Maybe those who say that like a doctor, like a person traveling on the train, it's not a way of endearment or intimacy. And there are those who try to figure out what Rav Moshe, to balancing how Rav Moshe sort of, so to speak, to titrate these two opinions as well. Generally speaking, there are some poskim who will see that Drachel Darchei Noam, and which you have to be careful with how you apply that. But Ein Lahachmir Bazeh, one can be makel, and in Alech Yisrael, quote Rav Scheinberger says, "B'makom halbonas panim yesh lahakel." Let's say it's going to cause great embarrassment, then there's room to be makel. Aval yaseh be'ofen she'eino derech chiba. A person should, let's say one is offered a hand to shake, and it is embarrassing to a person who doesn't understand the sensitivities of Orthodox Judaism, then one may respond, but one has to do it in such a way that it's not derech chiba. Some people say what's called the dead fish tail, which is some people do this naturally, right? Just every handshake is it doesn't feel very or they just the iron beam, like where you just it's not very clear that it's very clear that you're not interested in engaging. Just so I understand, in the non-Jewish world, handshaking is not endearment, right? It's just a perfunctory function of sealing a deal or greeting as well, right? So but nonetheless, in the non-Jewish world as well, we say more.
I will tell you that in the course of daily life, you are judged on how you shake.
Very interesting.
Comment on it all the time, positively and negatively. It's something I experience every single day.
Fascinating.
It is not something. At least in the course of what I do, I find that it's constant because I'm always struggling with this particular issue. Certainly with the men in the practice, it's part of creating the relationship. It's not perfunctory at all. If you don't shake hands with a patient, it was different during COVID, or it's an infection issue, whatever. But otherwise, how you have that, it's critical to the encounter.
That's fascinating.
Not in any way perfunctory issue.
No, thank you for sharing that. And you should know, also in certain communities, like let's say also in the Sephardic communities as well, sometimes the lack of shaking a hand is a sign of distrust as well when creating a deal. So one has to understand the context of that. I, as a rabbi, have a little bit more a leeway in the sense that I get offered hands many times. And I'm able to say, just because of my religious function, makes it a little easier for me to say it's not you. It's just it's my religious sensitivities. Is that I'm only allowed to engage in touch with my spouse, right? So that I'm a little easier just because of my profession. But if for the average person out in society, there's so much more. It's so much more complicated than this. But this is a discussion in halacha, and this is perhaps the background, which is why some Jews are more careful with this, and other Jews perhaps are a little less careful. Why is that Jewish women often wear skirts, right? So it's not. First of all, it's not just Jewish women. A lot of conservative Christians wear modest. It's funny. I was speaking to my wife. My wife was trying to find a modest bathing suit. So I said, "Did you find it at a Jewish store?" She said, "No. There's tons of women who don't want to just look like they're in underwear going to the beach, right? Meaning, like, why should?" There's lots of Christians in this country who believe in modesty, right? And so there are many modest bathing suits because why should a woman have to undress for men to look at her, right? So this is part of the conservative nature of Judaism. Judaism in general is more conservative minded, which means to say the styles of the society that we have are what we keep with, and we don't change fast as well. So even though today, technically speaking, many modest Christian women even will wear pants, and it's still a sign of modesty, we still hold on to skirts, which is still more more modest, which is still a more modest way of dressing. In general, we always stay, so to speak, at the earlier, much more conservative model of dressing as well. Part of this is hats as well. Noel getting into that whole topic as well, is hats is a sign of a person who lives in society with respect. And although society today is a polo shirt with 3 unbuttoned buttons, that's kind of like, average work attire today. Judaism is not that way. We're still back where society was, minus 75 years, where it looks like people actually look respectful when they show up to meetings and so on, which is something we take seriously. Why is it that some Jewish men have those side locks, right? Like, why do they have all those curly things coming out the sides? So the truth is that the Torah tells us a very important mitzvah, which is lo sakefu pas roshchem. You should not cut off the corners of your head. That's what the Torah says. V'lo sashchis is pas zekeinecha, and you should not cut off the corners of your beard. So this is a mitzvah specifically to men. This mitzvah is specifically to men. And as a function of this, why is this mitzvah true? So the Rambam understands it and the Sefer HaChinuch says it is because of the way of Avodah Zarah. Generally speaking, in the times of the earlier years, it sounds like that generally speaking, the way of the Avodah Zarah was to take off the sides of their hair and only have the top of their hair. The Mohawk style was very in for pagans in those days. And generally speaking, Judaism is the opposite. Judaism is the top of the head is less important. By the way, it doesn't last, right? It's the sides which is really important. I remember when one of my children was born, he had no hair at the top, he only had hair on the sides, and I said he has a preceding hairline, but I was, that's the Jewish view is the sides more than the top. Interesting enough, today, by the way, if you're looking at the average fashion, is the same thing is true today, right? Unfortunately, right? In secular society, you have them look like horses, right? Like these men, they look like homeless horses. Right, they've walked off the park bench with hair flowing off the top, and there's nothing on the sides, right? Or it's the fade, right? And unfortunately, what the non-Jewish world looks like is what our children want to do as well, which is, you'll see the models even in the Jewish stores looking like these homeless horses. It's not a good thing, right? In general, Judaism emphasizes the sides of the head as well. Interestingly enough, the Chinuch also points out that there's another reason is because it's ois, like the bris milah is an ois kavua begufon la'abdila mishar umois. That similarly is about the hair as well, which is we dress differently, we wear our hair differently as well. Generally speaking, it's worthwhile noting that there's 2 separate areas. The pas zakan is the bottom area, the corners of the chin. That's generally where a person is not allowed to remove the hair. And the pas harosh are by the temples, so to speak. There's behind the ear, down to the bottom of the below where the temple is. This sort of area and behind the ear is what's called pas harosh, the corner, the back of the head, down to the temple and below to where the jawbone is. That's the area which is not allowed to be removed. Interesting enough, there's a debate as to how this works. When it comes to pas zakan, which is the beard, one is not allowed to remove it with a ta'ar. A ta'ar is a blade, right? That's the way most non-Jews shave is. They have a razor and they bring the blade along the skin and it cuts the hair very finely. Jews are not allowed to do that. But Jews are allowed to cut their hair. So if you're to take a scissor and cut your beard, that's all right. Generally speaking, the Jews today use shavers. Shavers are essentially a thin film with a rotating blade underneath it or an agitating blade underneath it, and that cuts it in a scissor-like motion, and that's fine for many shavers, not all shavers, but for many shavers that's fine because that's a scissor motion. When it comes to the pas harosh, the corners of the actual head, that is not allowed to be removed, both with a tar or with misparayim, whether a razor or cutting, which means that it's more stringent on the sides of the head, this area over here, and as a function of that, you can't even use a shaver to remove that area of the head. There's a discussion as to how long this needs to be, and again, today we're in a generation of quantifying these laws, but in the old days they just had a sensitivity to this, But the way it's generally passed, and Rabelsky would say is the way it's described is that the hair should be able to bend over itself and touch its own root. What does that look like practically? So Rabelsky says a very simple thing: is the film size 2, right, on the shaver, which means to say is you need to have a 2 is the shortest it can be for the pas arosh when shaving this area. I've noticed that a number of Jewish men in their 40s, when they start to lose the top of their hair, they take it all off. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to take off the sides of your hair. You're not allowed to shave your head. This area cannot be shaved. But nonetheless, that's what the Isser is.
Even if someone shaves their entire head, not allowed, obviously. Because that's a style. Not a style.
It's a style. You're not allowed to do that below a 2, at least on the side area. Be'er there is an interesting discussion as to where the Hasidim come into this. The Hasidim, interestingly enough, they've taken what is an Isser, right? What is an Isser, meaning to say like this. Generally speaking, I can do Hidra Mitzvah, but let's say by an esrog. The Torah tells me to take an esrog. I'm going to get the biggest, most beautiful, most wonderful esrog, right? That's called Hidra Mitzvah. I'm making it better. Generally speaking, there isn't Hidra Mitzvah when it comes to a Mitzvah Lo Yisaseh, right? Meaning, the Torah tells us, let's think of the average Mitzvah Lo Yisaseh. Don't eat, crab. Don't eat, X. How do you do Hidra Mitzvah? How do you beautify not doing something, right? But when it comes to this particular mitzvah, the Hasidim have taken it in such a way where they emphasize the not cutting of that area of the head and they turn it into these side locks, which today, in a certain sense, whether we like it or not, has become a symbol of Judaism, right? So when people see that, they know that that is a Jew. They don't think Hasidic Jew. That's not what they think. They think Jew. They think we're no different to that as well. And that is emphasizing this particular, called symbol of Judaism. It is not a chiyuv. It is a cultural expression of this particular Isser, but nonetheless, it has lasting value and it distinguishes Jews from non-Jews in general.
I believe they have there's a Kabbalistic, based on the Zohar, never to touch. As a function of that, but just understand this. The Torah says, "Lo sakivu pas roshem." There is a shear, meaning it is quantified as to how short you can cut it. What they're saying is that we should never touch it whatsoever because that's already a pretty significant extension of that, which never was, right, up till 250 years ago, but it's a wonderful thing. It's great. Why is it that Jews are always walking around on Saturday? I'm driving down Broadway and I see these Jews are walking, and it's raining and it's in the sun and they're walking. Why are they walking? So the reason is because the Torah tells us that among the many prohibitions on Shabbos is loy sevaru eish b'chol moshvei sechem b'yom HaShabbos. You're not allowed to kindle a fire. So just a little fun fact is whenever you press the accelerator in your car, just to give you the numbers for a second, when your car is idling, your engine is doing between 600 and 800 revolutions per minute. Okay? And that means to say is that between 5 to 6.6 times every second, the shock, the spark plugs are firing, which means to say is like this. Your car has a number of cylinders, pistons, which are essentially a tube with a metal rod in it, are pushing up and down, which is what pushes the axle of the engine to move round and round and round. And those are triggered when fuel is injected at the bottom of the piston, and the spark plug releases a spark, creating an explosion which pushes the piston up. And pistons in alternating positions are pushing up and down, which allows the engine to move, to create circular motion, right? That's how cars move. When the car's in idle, about 5 times a second, the spark plugs are firing. When you're driving in the city, 16.6 times per second. When you're on the highway, about 25 times per second. And when you're doing a high acceleration, you're doing 50 times the spark plugs are firing per second. Every time a spark plug fires, that is Aish, right? So meaning, this is not electricity. Electricity is a separate Isser of perhaps Moiled. There's all the discussion on electricity. Spark plugs are not electricity. Spark plugs is a spark. A spark is an Isser D'Oraisa. That's very, very clear. Which is, by the way, why it is that even, let's say, when a person needs to get to the hospital for a birth, they should use an Uber, not drive, if they have time. Because driving is an Isser D'Oraisa, and an Uber is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Right? The Isser D'Rabbanan is Amir La'akum, right? But it's important to distinguish. Driving on Shabbos is an Issur D'Oraisa. So therefore, Jews do not drive on Shabbos, they walk on Shabbos, unless there's an emergency as well.
Does the electric car make this better?
Electric car makes things a whole lot better in this respect, yes. When it comes to this, unless it's a hybrid. Right? But yes, when it comes to this particular issue, it doesn't mean to allow it, it's an Issur D'Rabbanan. Right, once somebody said, so it's only an Issur D'Rabbanan. So I remember was saying, yeah, well, you only go to an D'Rabbanan Gehinnom, so. but nonetheless, but the point is, in terms of emergency, it makes it easier. The electric car is actually much better than a regular car in this respect because of the.
Taxi where no outcome is there. It's like it drives by itself.
You're right, but it's the same thing as you're controlling. Meaning today, not to make the comparison not to make it seem belittling, but why can't I put, if I put a time switch on for X, right? Is our right? The answer is for it depends on what. Meaning for my hot tray, for my lights, it's fine. But I'm going to put it on for the TV, or I'm going to put it on to the answer is putting on a time is like the same as Amir La'akum, in the sense that I'm having a system set up that I'm in charge of that's doing malacha for me on Shabbos. That's Amir La'akum, whether it's an electronic system or a non-Jew I'm speaking to. And it's going to become more and more prevalent when it comes to somebody was saying to me, they've got this thing called a cage, which is it's an AI system which is connected to their house, and all they need to say is it's warm in here, and then it'll move the thermostat. It's not like even Alexa do this. You just speak to it, and it now the AI system is controlling the thermostat and the lights and so on. That is the same, meaning it doesn't. It's not an akum, it's not a non-Jew. It's a system that you're controlling. Okay, okay. Why is it that Jews are so involved in money, right? This is a question we set up with. I tried during the BLM movement to reach out to reverends in the black community as well. Really, to a large degree, unfortunately, like a dramatically disappointing experience, because we tried. Of course, even though the black community in general was not being persecuted or being hunted down in the streets, there was one or two episodes that occurred at the hands of police with terrible people who, and it shouldn't have been, but nonetheless, the Jewish community reached out, and we did our part to. That it was silence the other way around when Jews were actually being hunted down, and so on. It seems to be a one way. Unfortunately, I've learned that the Jewish community always reaches out, but it's not the other way around, unfortunately. But be as it may, one of the many misunderstandings about Judaism is why are Jews always involved in money. And that we discussed this when we were having our conversations, and that was a question they asked because that's the way they view it. They view that Jews are just involved in money all the time. So the truth is that if you go back to Shakespeare's Merchant in Venice, it's not a new stereotype that the Jew is there, trying to get their money or their pound of flesh from a poor Christian. And there's a whole discussion. Was Shakespeare anti-Semitic or no? It was just the milieu of the time, meaning to say it's all right because every was anti-Semitic. That's sort of the argument as that was. But nonetheless, it's important to realize that in Christian lands where they did read the Bible, and Europe was primarily Christian then, the usury is not allowed. And so the Christians were not allowed to be moneylenders. And so this was the one job that was relegated to Jews during many centuries, because Jews were also not allowed to own land, they weren't allowed to attend university, they weren't allowed to have to hold positions in public office for many, many centuries, even until Napoleon. And then even when Napoleon came in the Great Liberation, and even when the liberation happened in the Germanic provinces in the mid-1800s, this was still the case in many places. So Jews were very limited. One of the only positions they could have was money lending. That was just what they were allowed to do. It is interesting that Ruth Wise, in a book called Jews in Power, which is really an excellent book, she makes the observation is because Jews were so limited and such a low glass ceiling in their ability, when the society finally did open to them, they climbed really fast into society because they were so used to operating with both their hands tied behind their backs that when suddenly they were allowed into universities, they were allowed to have professions, they did exceptionally well, right? But that wasn't because they controlled society. It was simply just because they weren't able to. Meaning Jews, even in the late 1800s, Jews still were not allowed to own land in most places in Prussia, which became Germany. And so you can't accumulate wealth in the same way as non-Jews. It's unbelievable. Be it as it may, it is also worthwhile noting that in a 2024 study,
which involved 3,000 Orthodox Jews, conducted by the Langus podcast of the OU. They looked at just the cost of Jewish living today. 78% of the respondents of 3,000 Orthodox Jews said that finances are a source of major stress for them, and only about half of the respondents are earning between $250,000 to $300,000 annually, and they felt that they were making it. They felt they were just making it. Even those who earn above $300,000 a year, more than 30% said they felt financially strained. 2/3 of the respondents said they carry debt, and 62% said they rely on parental support for at least one of their major life expenses. Right? Today, it's a standard issue that schools will speak to grandparents because kids simply cannot afford to pay tuition today. About 80% of the respondents said they live in the New York tri-state area, broadly in line with the geographic distribution of Orthodox Jews, and 82% reported an annual gross income of above $100,000. Compare this to the non-Jewish world currently, just to give you a sense. The median household incomes in the U.S. in 2024 was a bit over $83,000 per family. That's the median income of the non-Jewish family. And the median salaries in New York and New Jersey. So in New York New Jersey is $69,000 and $83,000 in New York. An average family in the non-Jewish world needs $107,000 to cover all its necessities, according to a study done by Smart Asset. And just to put this in perspective, just in our neighborhood, I know that a family that's not earning over $350,000 is not making it. They can't. They're not. It's not possible for them to make it. Which means you can have an average non-Jewish family can have 1.5 jobs and be doing fantastic and go on vacation and so on. In the Jewish world, it's simply not sustainable. The amount of, meaning how many CEOs and how many business owners can you possibly have that everybody has to become to earn that? So you say, why are Jews into money? This is the answer that I gave the reverends, is we have such an incredibly high scale of living because of education and the Orthodox neighborhoods and the prices of properties that we create for ourselves, that you need to earn ridiculous amounts of money to do this. It's not because we love wealth, it's we simply need to survive. Anybody earning below $300,000 is not making it unless they have parents' help. It's just not possible.
That median data assumes 2 children?
Does not reflect the number of children, but this is just the reality today, and it's becoming more and more. This is the reality. Unless you're a business owner, or unless you have parental support, there is no way in the tri-state area to make it, unless you are a CEO and so on. Which is that is the reality of Judaism today in America. In Israel, where you're not paying for tuition, you just earn meaning you're not earning as much, but you're not paying as much, right? So you're paying more taxes, but you're paying less to all these, to the health care and the tuition, which are some of the biggest costs in Jewish life today. Now, why is it that Jews seem to have their own ambulance team, right? This is a question that's brought up. So the truth is that in 1965 in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Rabbi Herschel Weber set up this emergency medical response team, and his belief was, and it's been replicated so many different times, is that we can't wait for the hospital to get the ambulance there. We need regular people who just have basic training to help in the meantime before the ambulance arrives. The Hatzalah network has expanded to almost every Jewish city. In New York right now, the Hatzalah is the second largest EMS provider in New York after FDNY, and it has over 1,300 volunteers working over 90 ambulances across the multiple neighborhoods, just in the New York system. Wow. In Israel, it's even more impressive. In Israel, with United Hatzalah, they have their bar is 90 seconds, which means to say is they have so many volunteers and the ambulance cycles. They allow that any episode that happens, once called in, is the response rate is within 90 seconds. That person has medical help to be able to make it till the ambulance arrives, which is just that stopgap measure. It is worthwhile noting that it is universal in the sense that although it's made by the Jewish community for the Jewish community, anybody who calls is answered. right? So meaning to say anybody who receives a Hatzara call is answered, and this is true in Israel as well. Whether it's Arab or Jew or Christian, everybody is responded to. And it just happens to be that if people say, why is that the Jews are the amnesty, and the answer is, with the greatest of pleasure, please set up your own, and we'd be very happy to help you. And here's the first few dollars to get it going. But yes, we've done this because it matters, and because of the way the Jewish community is structured, that you can have members of communities local, because everybody lives together. Then if you have EMS trained individuals who are living next door to you, then it's going to mean that you're going to have natural aid. It's built into a community that's close-knit and works together. Why is it that Jewish people take organs but they don't donate organs? So this is a point of great angst for many. So it goes back to the question of just determining the moment of death. And that is when do you consider a person dead? So it goes back to a mission in Yoma. The mission in Yoma talks about, and unfortunately we've just seen in Venezuela what happened, terrible earthquakes. Right, so the mission is talking about is are you allowed to uncover destroyed buildings during a state of an earthquake? And if there's a possibility of a person being alive under the that's pikuach nefesh, and you certainly may. The mission is going on to is that let's say you discover a part of the person, not that to separate it from anybody else, but meaning you uncover their head. Are you allowed to carry on uncovering? So the Mishnah just says when you get to the nose, that's when you determine whether you can carry on digging or not. Because when you get to the nose, meaning say if the person's buried, and you come to their nose, you can see if they're breathing or not. If they're breathing, then you carry on saving them. If they're not breathing, then you don't carry on digging because they're not alive. If they're not alive, then that means to say that they've passed away and it's no longer pikuach nefesh. Now it's kavod hameis. Kavod hameis does not doiche Shabbos. You'll wait until after Shabbos. This is the Mishnah is talking about in general. So from this Mishnah, there's a matter of great debate because it seems like from this Mishnah that breathing is the way to determine. You put a feather by their nostril and you see if they're breathing or not. Is the way to figure this out. So what about today, and where medical technology has provided the opportunity of a person whose brainstem has died, and the brainstem essentially controls all the major functions of their body, but a ventilator can keep their heart beating because the heart has its own system that when there's oxygen being pumped into the lungs, the heart is still operating, and the heart will continue to send blood even though essentially the brainstem has died, which creates this in-between situation. Happens to be, it's a debate, the Chachmas Adam Paskins, that death is determined when a person stops breathing, whereas the Chacham Tzvi says no, that it is a siman that the person is alive. Breathing is not the reason a person is alive, it's a sign that the person is alive, which means to say is that a person could be dead and still breathing, because you could be simulating the breath process, right? But it's artificial and they're really actually dead. The reason why this is so critical is because most organs have to be harvested while there's still blood supply, which is in a state where they're still in a ventilator. So generally speaking, where legally death has been determined, and again, each state is different, so it's a little hazy. People can be alive in New Jersey and dead in New York. But a person, but technically speaking, a person is on a ventilator with brain death, and they've passed the tests of non-responsiveness. They would be determined as brain dead. That would be considered legal death. That now qualifies them to be able to donate their organs, because the organs can be harvested while they're still having blood supply. Whereas once there is no longer blood supply, those organs very fast are no longer going to be usable. That's how organ donation happens. According to this debate in halacha, is going to be a major debate as to whether you're allowed to do this, because according to those who understand that death is determined by breathing, even if it's artificial breathing, then reaping the organs is murder. So Judaism says we should save lives at all costs, but you can't murder somebody to save lives. That's one of the three cardinal sins. As a function of that, it becomes more complicated in halacha. So, for instance, the Tzitz Eliezer of Woldenberg paskins that organ donation through at the time of brain death is ritzicha, is murder. Right, and that's the general consensus that Tzitz Eliezer has. Rosh Shlomo Zalman was more concerned. He said a person is in a state of a goises at such a point, and there became the question: is there was the famous situation that was done? Is that the Gemara tells us that a person, a woman who lo aleinu,
passes away, is dead, and when she has a fetus in utero, the fetus will also die before she dies. That's the Gemara says. So then they did the famous experiment where they had a goat which had a baby in utero, a fetus in utero. They chopped off its head, and they were able to birth the baby afterwards, indicating that in fact this definition of death is perhaps different to the way that the Gemara viewed death as well. This is a whole experiment. They showed Rav Shlomo Zalman this whole discussion, and he agreed theoretically, actually, that technically speaking, that that brain death itself could in fact qualify as death, but he said it's very hard to test for it because you can't do invasive testing because the person is in a state of gesesa, which means you can't really touch them as well. Dr. Steinberg told me, who was speaking, who presented this question to Rav Shlomo Zalman, said that today the tests are able to be done in such a way that it does not even move the body. So he believes that if Rav Shlomo Zalman was around today, he would agree with this. Be it as it may, in America, generally speaking, the consensus, the RCA perhaps Psychos follows Rosh Shechter, which is that brain death is not considered death in America, generally speaking, although Rabbi Tendler was very much a proponent of HODS, which is the Halachic Organ Donation Society, saying that it is all right, but that is a minority opinion in America. In Israel, the Psak, or the Supreme Court, actually, in consultation with Rav Avadia, Chacham Avadia Yosef at the time, asked for a Psak, and in Israel, the official Psak of the country is that brain death is considered death with very specific regulations, much more regulated than here in America because of the halachic concerns, with more tests to be done, is considered death, which is why in Israel, organ donation happens, right? Whereas the Orthodox community in America is more concerned with this because of the general psak in America. Rav Moshe's opinion is somewhat hazy when it comes to this. Yeah.
There was actually a trend in medicine now where it's something called organ harvesting after circulatory death.
Yes.
So they basically, even not only the Jewish people, I mean generally, because of the organ shortage, they do now harvest organs of people that basically get disconnected from the ventilator. They wait like 3-4 minutes until there's no function at all, and then they harvest the organs. So
that would be an amazing solution, and it'll make it a lot easier.
That's happening, and the survival is actually the
organs.
Is the same as.
It's an amazing. That is an amazing thing because I remember I read an article.
These are not brain dead people necessarily.
I don't
think.
I'm not
necessarily.
100% sure,
Not
but I
necessarily.
think clearly they come off life support and they die basically, and then the organs.
But they're doing withdrawal of
After
life support.
clearly
But you're
there's-
withdrawing life support.
Could be.
Right, yeah. So the withdrawal of life support itself, there are grounds for withdrawal of life support in certain circumstances. But yes, if that would be the case, then halachically, if that would be possible. I would just point out that I remember reading an article, there was a Times in Israel editorial written by a conservative rabbi, and he was bemoaning and slamming and lambasting the Orthodox community for taking organs but not donating organs, and how could it be, and so on. And he said it's a selfish matter, and he didn't even address the fact that there's this concern of ritzicha, of murder, depending on how you define death. And I wrote back to it. I pointed out that of all kidney donations, which is a live donation, the Orthodox community is the highest in America. The Jewish community in America produces the most amount of kidneys of directed altruistic donations, and that's live donation. So it's not an issue about whether you donate organs or not. The question is just about, is there a way to do halachically without killing somebody? That's the major question. And so if we were to find a way that organ donation were to be sidestepping this issue, then we would absolutely do this. One last point over here. Just one last interesting question, and we'll close with this. Just interesting point is, why are there so many Jews in every place in the world? So non-Jews ask this question. So just a quick numbers quickly right now. As of now, there are 15.8 million Jews worldwide, at least self-defined as Jews. Roughly 0.2% of the global population. Nearly 90% of them living in Israel or America. There's 7.7 in Israel, about 6 to 6.3 in the United States. France is 440,000. Canada has 398,000. United Kingdom has 312,000 as of now. But if you ask your average non-Jew how many Jews there are, they grossly overestimate this. They assume that if you ask them, obviously a lot of them would say around 200 million is the suggestion of this. And this is because Jews have an oversized, a disproportionate involvement in global affairs, but it also is a basic anti-Semitic trope, which comes back down to Paro. Because what does he say? That these people are too many and they're going to grow and they're going to be a fifth column. And so I mean to say that trope, that anti-Semitic trope still stays with us today. And it's a very worthwhile conversation to have with a non-Jew and say, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? And it is always astounding to see how much overestimated they are. And then that becomes a very important conversation to be had afterwards, which is, why do you think that? Why is it that that's on your mind? And then if it's the media, then why is it on the media's mind the entire time, where we have an outsized, disproportionate platform, whereas there are many other things going on in the world at the same time, which is a fascinating topic. We'll stop over here. Rabbi, so thank you so